Okay, so this review was recorded partially back in June of 2018, meaning that the audio and the opinion might be different from then and now. The reason this review is finally getting out now is because I was very busy back then, and I had this idea on hold, but it eventually got buried in time. Well, here it is now. Hypothetically, that makes this a retro review, doesn't it? One of my favorite games on the Super Nintendo was Chrono Trigger. It was a cool time travel themed game that had an amazing story. Another classic on the same system that I love is Turtles in Time. Both of these games are awesome and are great examples of all-star Super Nintendo games with tons of replay value and good fun. That being said, it's hard for me to believe that on the same exact system, we get another time travel game that should have stayed in the past, Mario's Time Machine. A disaster of a game that I don't ever envision changing my opinion on anytime in the future. In fact, let's keep in mind that when reviewing this game, the name Mario's Time Machine is bound to bring the idea of encouraging humanity's extinction upon laying eyes on this filth. So when beginning this review, I have to emphasize that I don't exactly have a physical copy of this game, so I had to emulate it off this shitty website. Why I don't own a physical copy? Well, because I couldn't find a copy at my local game store, and why the fuck would I look for one in the first place? Anyway, so you guys remember that infamous game Mario is Missing? Yeah, well, the same people that made this game, Software Toolworks, also made Mario's Time Machine. These two games have the same reputation of being shitty educational games that stain the Mario franchise. Only difference really is the main protagonist between the two games. Mario is Missing gets the one-up of notoriety due to it arguably being Luigi's first main lead appearance in a Mario game, making Mario's Time Machine get swept under the rug, and for a good reason. This sandwich is good. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Mario, had no involvement in the creation of Mario's Time Machine and was instead capitalized on by Nintendo because educational games were getting some traction at the time. Even if there was little involvement from higher power at Software Toolworks, they still probably used all their development funds on PCP because I have no idea how this plot was made. The story follows Bowser's latest dastardly plot to build his own personal museum by building a time machine and robbing shit from different periods of time. Whether it be because he was bored or if he just wants to show off a valuable collection, either way it's retarded because it fucks up the current fabric of time, ruins the whole significance of said items due to removing them from said event, and how he could literally just use the time machine for more expansive villainous acts on the Mushroom Kingdom. Like he could literally prevent the birth of the main reason his plans get foiled in the first place, but no, he wants to steal Michelangelo's fucking beret. Mario must stop Bowser from his tomfuckery by stealing the time machine and returning all the stolen goods to their respective periods in history. Brings me to the biggest reason for my disdain of this game. It's educational. And as we all know, learning gets you nowhere in the world, evidenced by the creators of this game, and educational games serve as a prime example of how not to entertain your audience. I mean, come on, we're learning about the most boring shit in the world. Why can't we get something more of substance to learn about, like chemistry? Or how about not learning anything at all? Now, much of the gameplay is a hybrid between platformer and interactive fill-in-the-blank Snorefest, which involves you traveling around throughout history, talking to famous figures from the time, and giving the items to the corresponding people. The dialogue is long and boring, and you could literally phone a pizza and have it get to your door before you even complete a single dialogue segment. There's even an out-of-place surfing interlude segment between traveling through time. Get it? Because surfing through time? Yeah, I have no clue either. Outside of the general gameplay, the process is pretty simple. Grab whatever item in the room, bring it up to the time machine, select the exact era of time you want to go to, walk around until you find the item's owner, fill in the blanks of your homework puzzle sheet thingy, and return to the castle. Rinse and repeat. You follow this process a whole 15 times and it can get super grueling. Eventually you defeat Bowser and the game ends like that. So yeah, no fun and challenging platforming like traditional Mario games, no desire for replayability due to how boring it is, and no reason to ever reevaluate the things I've said in the near future. If I had to take away anything that I learned from this game though, it would be that Isaac Newton invented gravity. That and this game fucking sucks, like this review. Well, that's it, guys. I'm glad I sat down to do this review because I doubt I'm ever going to re-review it in the future. So that being said, guys, have a good... Well, I bet some of you viewers caught that foreshadowing from a mile away. That, or you just checked the red bar in the video to see how much longer was in it, yeah. So when we're younger, we always tend to make stupid decisions. It takes time to process and pinpoint the artistic merit behind certain things, especially if the meaning isn't clear. Mario's Time Machine doesn't seem like a classic on the surface, but upon further inspection, there is something miraculous to be unearthed. Younger me had a smooth brain back then, you know, the meaning skated on my head like Lion King on ice. So considering the occasion, what I'm going to do for this video actually is the safest and closest thing to actually going back in time that we are currently capable of doing right now, you know, in relation to the time travel gimmick, re-evaluating and re-editing my takes on this completely hate-fueled and outdated video. Actually going back in time to influence my past self would instead change my evaluations and my current self for the worse. Like, I could actually become like a shitty YouTuber or something. Beginning our journey role-playing dollar store Back to the Future, one thing I noticed when searching up Super Nintendo games with time travel on Google, I saw the first thing that showed up was none other than Mario's Time Machine. Not Chrono Trigger, not Turtles in Time, but Mario's Time Machine front and center. This totally incites the popularity and love for the game that stands present in front of everything else that would otherwise seem classic. Not because of the namesake of the title, no, but out of pure trust for the internet. My past self, along with other normies, usually look over the popularity of certain media in reviews, meaning our analytics missed the crucial concept of why that piece is popular. If something was truly terrible or forgettable, then it wouldn't be nearly as popular. Sure, a lot of popularity of certain undeserved franchises can get annoying, but that realistic means that there is shared appreciation for that specific thing. Even shitty games get some form of respect and appeal from an audience somewhere in the world. Certainly not from me, that's for sure. Like the fans having a movie grow on them, the growth of this game's creation and genius comes from the gentle strokes of the development and its team. The creation of the game was a unique one, as it was an odd case of Nintendo actually not interfering with the creation process. One thing I heard is that Software Toolworks, the developers of the game, had to have this big Nerf gun office war thingy with Nintendo to decide who got superior management over the game's creation. Suffice to say, Nintendo got lit up due to being completely outsmarted in tactics. Yeah, not a good idea to fight a dev team full of people specialized in education. They're bound to be smart and certain times mad OD. Software Toolworks at the time was also well known for making other educational Mario games. You remember Mario's Missing, right? Yeah, basically similar premise as Mario's Time Machine, but involves Luigi in the modern era. Due to the rise of educational demand in gaming, Software Toolworks were tasked to treat the game's creation like a final exam, where all the elements of the game's fun and learning had weight and consequences behind it all. For sake of simplicity, I had decided on playing and reviewing the Super Nintendo version of this game. Between the PC and Super Nintendo version, there isn't much to say or note other than there's different historical figures from each. There was also an NES version of this game released, which was drastically different and inferior to the SNES and PC version. This is quite simply due to the console's limitations. The NES version was made separately by a company called Radical Entertainment, which explains its drastic difference from other versions, focusing more on traditional Mario platforming instead of the main focal point, which was the education, probably why the game sold worse in the long run. Pretty dank collector's item though for those interested. According to programmer Carlos Giustiniano, creating the game despite its purposeful challenge required a lot of precision and focus on the educational factor. So they had to try their absolute best to make both a fun educational piece and a fun game overall, borrowing books from their local libraries and citing scholarly sources at the time to pinpoint all the methods of making engaging learning for the masses. Like many other big pieces of media at the time, however, Software Toolworks had to take some liberties to sustain a proper story, and boy, what a story it is. As you know, the story in summary is about Mario preventing Bowser from stealing ancient artifacts from history and making a museum out of them. But the story is a lot more complex than Bowser simply taking a time machine and robbing artifacts from different points in history. No, that's a surface level explanation. Digging into a more in-depth take on the story, it involves the societal struggle of Bowser, where his mental capacity has reached a peak due to his jealousy over Mario constantly beating him. So he uses his intellect to build a time machine to fix his situation. It's a character study on how greed of materialism and valuables overtakes opportunity within the smartest and greatest of all of us. I mean, if Bowser is able to defy expectations and build a time machine, then he's definitely cursed with envy and jealousy over Mario's acquired wealth and status. Mario's motives as the heroine of the story are also very complex and relatable to the audience. Mario, like any sane person, doesn't want his present time period warped simply by Bowser sneezing or masturbating in the past and having their current reality warped. Mario's diligence to save his own reality, his brother, and the princess are some great story beats to follow by. Not only this, but the interactions with Mario and the historical figures he meets is great character development. As the main character, it's important that we relate and understand what our hero goes through. Many major Mario games likewise just have a simple reaction whenever he gets harmed or killed on screen, which to me is soulless and unconvincing from a storytelling standpoint. Meanwhile, in Mario's Time Machine, we watch the growth and development of Mario interacting with these historical icons, and, most importantly, we learn about the history alongside of him. It's so convincing, in fact, that the audiences might even literally react, like even rob school libraries to learn even more than their educational system gives them. Beyond just the characters individually, the structure of the story is really solid too. It may seem repetitive on the surface due to the, well, repetitive nature, but at least it isn't as monotonous as a Mario Bros. NES speedrun. Like seriously, what's the point of repeating the same 4 minutes only to shave off a millisecond? Speedrun shaming aside, it doesn't take a person a minute to realize that the story execution is a very well done one. It's not easy to near seamlessly thread a time travel story where you go to different time periods and seek out missing items. Where a film like Back to the Future or Chrono Trigger totally fails is the emphasis of getting back to the present while also changing the past there. Sure, it creates for a story goal and climax, but it doesn't make for an immersive experience. Here in Mario's Time Machine, you can explore and shit and go around for as long as you like. Sure, the fabric of time might be warped beyond oblivion in their present time, but I don't think it matters too much. Yeah, I know a lot about quantum physics, I've seen Endgame, and eventually, the game ends with Bowser getting his comeuppance. One thing I happen to notice a lot in game reviews involving educational games is the lack of talk in the game's actual educational value. This is something I think that should be discussed and taught properly, and now is my chance to do so in this video. For context, my home country, America, used to be one of the world's smartest countries, but come the 1990s, we gradually got stupider and stupider. Now, stupid kids have existed all throughout history, but the population of the world has significantly grown, and the advancement of modern technologies has kind of spoiled the youth. The average kid in 1995 couldn't figure out what 2 plus 2 was, which I think was really a sign for Software Toolworks to do something. The decision to make now between the development team was to figure out which educational topic to represent and teach in their game. And after about 6 seconds of evaluation, they came up with a properly formed pitch of making it a history-related teaching game. Remember the film Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure from the late 80s? It was a movie about 2 dumbass high schoolers about to fail their history class, and it was the only way for them to pass high school. Very similarly, they learn about history by taking a time-traveling telephone booth to nab some historical figures from history's past to help them out. Obviously, Software Toolworks took massive inspiration from this movie, and not only that, but it was a cool concept for any impressionable kid. But it also proved that the hardest subject in the universe is history. Remember STEM, that acronym that represents the 4 most important subjects in the ever-evolving world? Well, fuck that shit. History is the true lucrative and important topic not given enough credit. And if it was in the acronym, it was poorly represented as a silent H. STEM. Sounds German. As mentioned before, history was not an easy topic to learn, so Software Toolworks was faced with the challenging task. Make an educational game that gives the players memorable experiences and actually teaches them something. A game that came out a prior year, Mario Teaches Typing, was also a good teaching game for kids, but despite the game's praise, especially from me, the game's teaching aspect wasn't perfect. Software Toolworks could now take the missing links that Mario Teaches Typing didn't, well, teach, and incorporate them into this game. A lot of the game's dialogue and gameplay directly involves interaction and the gameplay with the history itself. Now, considering direct experience as a potent teaching tool, I know this too well, the idea of immersing your favorite Italian plumber into the action of seeing these historical figures themselves will definitely leave your children reciting the entirety of the Declaration of Independence. You get to meet the townspeople of the eras along with the historical figures themselves as you retrieve their items that Bowser has stolen. Not many educational games bring this emphasis to the table, as instead the main focus tends to be the education more than the gameplay itself. You also figure out various fill-in-the-blank puzzles over the course of the game's playthrough, and you are challenged to select the correct answer, which puts your knowledge to the test. Now, some may be turned off by the fact that this game involves mixing Mario with education, which essentially is two worlds colliding. This is probably also referring to the weird sight of seeing Mario interact with people like Queen Elizabeth on screen. Well, it honestly is a fair argument to make when considering many educational games involving big gaming mascots. It simply looks different, and I can't blame them for not being in tune with something they're used to, shifting gears to a newer concept. After all, many did not like the graphical shift in Pokemon Sword and Shield. To summarize, education is a very integral part to human evolution, regardless of how boring it can be. Learning about our past through the game's educational value, like time traveling itself, is also very important to understanding ourselves, and that is exactly what Mario Teaches Typing achieves. I totally learned a ton from this game's experience, mainly because I had never passed first grade. But that's besides the point, considering the way the player experiences it is just as important as the player learning the material. Mario is a game franchise of many genres: racing, sports, board games, you name it. Most notably, it's identified as a platformer, and it was the root of how the franchise really took off. Well, what if I told you that every Mario genre was a solid F tier in terms of enjoyability? Yeah, now put your pitchforks down and just hear me out. Who wants to sit around and ruin friendships when we can enjoy the thrill of learning about Joan of Arc? Since most people back then were simpletons who wanted the same familiar genre regardless, Software Toolworks had to figure out a way to keep the flow and fun of the original Mario formula, but also build upon it by adding a penultimate game genre of edutainment to the mix. So they took the successful gameplay aesthetic of Super Mario World and slapped a museum and a time machine in there for good measure. And what you get Mario's Time Machine. You play as Mario, who traverses through the different periods of time via the famed platforming style. You do the traditional running and jumping, but what makes the game a change of pace is its lack of enemies or direct interaction with the platforming elements of other Mario games. I believe that this time, the game's focus is on a more atmospheric approach that doesn't deviate too much from the learning itself. Creating distractions with an emphasis on stomping on the baddies would just distract the players and teach them how to kill, and not pass their history midterms. You're thrown into these colorful and completely different environments every time you dial up an era, and the pixelated renders create a mesh of old school mosaic aesthetic with a dash of the modern Mario World look to it. Really, it makes me want to go to Pennsylvania or Massachusetts and learn about the times Mario saved the revolutionaries and Thomas Jefferson from peril of not finding the almighty Declaration of Independence. You can also interact with your surroundings and communicate with other people by going through doors and meeting people on the paths and street corners. These interactions are usually very in-depth and accurate to the time period it originated from, which makes me think that the creators themselves own a time machine or something. Anywho, the interactions give you insight on what's happening at the time and the artifacts and events and the person's whereabouts in the area. Afterwards, you're greeted with a paper that you must fill in the blanks to, which was mentioned before as a great direct way to teach the players of the current lessons at hand. Again, with that whole story immersion praise I gave earlier, the fact that you are learning alongside Mario while saving the day in epic fashion is something to admire Software Toolworks for achieving. The most unique feature in the gameplay here, though, is the time surfing thing in between travel that you must accomplish. This is a fresh change of pace from the heavy stress of learning. After all, anyone would need a break after being relentlessly taught Ivy League school levels of material. You surf on a surfboard and you must collect 10 super mushrooms at hyperfast speed and avoid whirlpools, otherwise you'll have to restart all over again. It's not often that a game incorporates a bonus stage every time you travel, especially with an educational game at that. Challenging but fair in the long run and a nice little intermission. Other than that though, the gameplay can get a little bit repetitive. The mere idea and powering through of playing Ancient Artifact Fetch 15 times in a row can get boring, regardless of how fun it is. I mean, I'm a COD Zombies and Tetris stan. Even I get bored of following routines. Other than that minor critique though, the gameplay is a really top-notch experience in most regards. And with all that out of the way, I can finally come back to the present day, aka stop editing my video currently, and come to a proper conclusion with all the evidence in mind. So, looking back on my old self and my old video, I can safely say that my opinion on that game has certainly changed, but it's not a complete 180. Yeah, I'm just as shocked as you considering the time traveling effects that the media has it out to be. I'm also shocked that something as simple as my perspective and opinion on something hasn't changed entirely. Then again, it wasn't actually me time traveling, more or less performing a stupid skip for this video. But yeah, the game is pretty standard. The graphics are good for the time, and the gameplay isn't too terrible, just not too crazy experimental or diverse. The story is fairly thorough and immersive, but only to those who are real gaming aficionados who can appreciate such a thing. And at the end of the day, it's an educational game. So the fact of the matter is that regardless of its engagement value, people are not looking to learn anything relating to real life, as video games are a form of escapism. Like the criticisms I had for Mario Teaches Typing way back then, we aren't looking to learn, but instead experience a temporary good time. Jesus, did I plant a gaming versus the media and industry narrative throughout this entire video by accident or something, and now I'm only noticing? So at the end of the day, Mario's Time Machine is a fine game, but nothing on the scale of Hotel Mario or even Shaq Fu. However, there's one major thing I would like to recollect from this time traveling experience, and that's the value of our own history and how we embrace our past. It's a sentimental message for all of us that go through, and something to cherish through our lives and beyond. Mario's Time Machine wasn't a masterpiece by any means, but at least it was entertaining and thus memorable for that reason. That's the beautiful thing about video games that most don't realize. If you can give your games a large amount of fond memorability, then your game will be timeless without a doubt. Video games at this point in history can be played and appreciated by anybody and everybody due to such time warping powers like backwards compatibility and emulation. Video games just have a powerful ability to directly connect the controller to the game, and because of this connection with the player and what's on screen, you create the experience that will stick with you for your entire life. Mario's Time Machine reflects on all the events of the past, and while not directly being a staple of your childhood or life, they still themselves stood out and are still remembered throughout history. It's video games like Mario's Time Machine that we can go back to and play at any time, and it's video games like Mario's Time Machine that have been able to change history and people by being such a fascinating work of art that gives reason to reflect on our past decisions. Totally not saying a hidden meaning in this video with that last statement.